hips set, and we can breathe in that position and we can keep that nice and strong so we can actually maintain a rigid spine under load, so it's going to flex less. Hey guys, welcome to Focus Performance Training. In today's video, I want to talk about how we can actually use the musculature in our breath to stabilize our midline when we're lifting, whether that be snatch, clean and jerk, squat, deadlift, bench, whatever it may be. Tune in, let's have a look and dive into this. All right, so in a recent video I got sent, it was from an online coach who was talking about setting their midline or their core to effectively brace for the snatch. And they talked about this way of like breathing against your diaphragm and pushing everything out. And we know that that's not really the case if we're pushing out this way, because the diaphragm is a muscle and it attaches underneath our rib cage. And when we contract and breathe in, the diaphragm contracts and pulls down, which changes the pressure gradient from our ribs to the air, which is important because that means the air will rush in and help to fill up this cavity in our lungs. That can then increase this intra-abdominal pressure because the diaphragm pulls down and compresses the gut wall. If we then from there think about pushing everything out and expanding the gut wall, we've then sort of created this system where we're releasing some of that pressure that the diaphragm's created. So if we continue to expand everything as we breathe in, we're not actually creating more pressure. We're just redistributing where that pressure is going and setting it around the body. We still want to create sort of a rim around our midline here below the rib cage where everything is tight. But when we breathe in, we want to actually make sure that that doesn't expand too much. So we can use the muscles around that area, i.e. transverse abdominis, internal, external obliques. We can use rectus abdominis for this as well, because that actually helps in expiration, so breathing out. And that's when we get that cue that I've talked about before, when we get hips to ribs, that instead of being extended in this position here, we can pull into a strong position and then we can breathe into that position there. Now, if we have to expand our thorax posteriorly to get some weight shift or move it anteriorly, we can do that as well. All right, so the big key on this point here is that we're not just trying to blow our midline out or our belly out so we've got this sort of tire around our body. And this is when it comes in, this can then flow into when we're using belts and stuff as well. We don't want to just reef that belt on so that we can push against it as well. That's there to act as a cue for us to brace against, so that can add more compression to that midline, so that what happens previously, that we're not just continuing to expand, because as we're trying to expand, we sort of drop into this anterior pelvic tilted position. And when we're snatching, that's going to be much, much harder to actually get contact and get vertical, because from there, we actually have to bring our hips forward, and that's going to send the bar a little bit further forward. So we want to have our pelvis in a relatively neutral position, all right? So that may differ from person to person based on your biomechanics. We want to have that set so that we can have a nice, strong platform to sit from. The cue or the sort of analogy I use, which isn't exactly perfect, it's just a rough heuristic to give a guide, but if we tilt our pelvis a long way forward, the fishbowl, if we imagine our pelvis being a fishbowl, all the water will run out. If we tilt it too far back, it'll run out backwards. So you want to try and keep that fishbowl nice and level. What that does as well is it allows for co-contraction or reflexive contraction. So as our diaphragm pulls down, pelvic floor will come up, and that's going to help to really increase that pressure in our midline. You notice how I'm not using the word core because I think it's a shit term. This is our midline. Core, people tend to think about, and just through the fitness industry, is your six-pack abs, right? Your transverse abdominis, rectus abdominis. That's not the case. There's so much more. There's even the muscles through our upper back which contribute to it as well. So, getting back to it. Pelvis is set, it's nice and flat. We can get some reflective contraction from the pelvic floor. Diaphragm will pull down. We're nice and tight. And then we can breathe into that area and we can create a much stronger contraction in this midline. Okay, what that will also do is increase that pressure. So as we breathe in, the air can shift into the positions that we need it to be in. So for example, in a front squat, when our shoulders are forward, we're compressing the anterior part of our chest. So the air is going to push into our back so we can shift our weight back, and that way we can keep the center of mass over the middle of our foot so we can stay balanced. If we're here and we're trying to breathe into this position here and push ourselves forward, we're gonna fall forward a lot more likely, which is gonna be less advantageous to having a good position. So the big takeaways from this to simplify everything that I've just said, all right? When we're trying to brace our midline for any movement, whether it's a dynamic movement in terms of snatch, clean and jerk, all right, or even sort of a landing movement, or even in a more static movement being back squat, deadlift, we don't want to just think about pushing our belly button out and trying to contract that as hard as we can thinking we're pregnant. It's not going to work because we're just going to be continuing to expand that area and you're not going to be able to create as much pressure. Okay? If we're going for maximal lifts, we want to be able to actually contract our midline, set our pelvis, breathe into that position, pull your rib cage down a little bit. We're not talking about this. We're going from this extended position here, which most weightlifters will find themselves in because we spend a lot of time in this split position or in that extended position pulling through. So rib cage down, hips set, and we can breathe in that position and we can keep that nice and strong so we can actually maintain a rigid spine under load, so it's going to flex less. The spine does need to flex, but does need to flex a lot when under load because when we're going to open ourselves up to a greater likelihood of injury. All right, so guys, if you need help with getting this set for yourself, let me know. We can go through some individual cues for yourself because everybody is different. We can also add in a constraints-based approach. So we can put you in different positions which make sense to your brain so that you can then carry across that. So we can start very low level and we can build that up. If you'd like to see examples of some low level constraints based approach to developing midline stability, let me know in the comments below and I can start to throw them into some of the stories and into the content that I produce as well. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one and let me know if this helps.